In the last screencast, we built the ability to let users create chat rooms. Now let's focus our attention to the chat page itself. Remember how clicking on a chat room link in the rooms page took us to a 404 page and that the URL included the room ID? Let's go into our routes module and we'll wire up our app to extract this room ID and use this to render the appropriate chat room. So first, for our chat route, put a / followed by a colon and the word ID. Now, since our room ID is dynamically added after a / to the chat route, using a colon and the word ID here allows us to extract the room ID from after the / and make it available here using the ID keyword. The ID is just a keyword here and you can call it anything you like. Under the hood, Express goes to an extra length to extract URL parameters of this nature. We've seen how standard URL parameters can be extracted. However, here, since the URL parameter appears just like a route representation, that is after a / rather than question mark and key value pairs, Express has to employ regular expressions to extract such request parameters, which I think is quite smart and expressive. Now, since it is possible for someone to invoke the chat route manually by passing in a non-existent ID as the URL parameter, we want to first check for the presence of a requested chat room before we can serve it up. And only if it is present shall we render it. So create a variable called getRoom and we'll access a helper function called findRoomById. Where we'll first pass in the reference to the app.locals.chatrooms array. Now I am in the route module and I don't have access to the app keyword. However, we can still get access to app.locals.chatrooms since it is provided to us in the request stream, to which we have full access. So pass in request or req.app.locals.chatrooms. We'll also pass in the ID that we've extracted from the URL. This can be done by accessing req.params.id. Express internally extracts all URL parameters based on the colon notation as expressed in the route declaration and puts it in a request object called params, which allows us to easily access the values like how we have done here. Now we'll write this find room by ID helper shortly, but what I can tell you is that it will return an undefined if it is unable to find a room based on a given ID. And if that happens, we'll return an invocation of the next keyword. What happens here is that if we invoke next, the rest of the route handler is just ignored and the control jumps to the next route handler middleware in line, and since there is nothing that matches, the control slips past everything to throw our good old 404 page to the user, indicating that such a room doesn't exist. Now if the room does exist, then we'll render it. I'm also going to pass in two more keys to our chat room page to render. First will be the room title, which we'll access from the object that our findRoomById method will return, and the ID of the room, which you have a choice to either pull from req.params.id or like how I've done here from the room ID key. These will be required shortly in the page, so it's a good idea to pass them in now. So let's now go ahead and write our findRoomById function, which accepts a reference to the chat rooms array as well as the room ID with which we want to look up the array with. Here, we'll simply use the find method to look up our array. Just like the find index method, find also requires a condition to be satisfied for it to return an element from the array. In this case, we are trying to match the room ID key from the object that describes every chat room in the array to the room ID that we are passing in to the findRoomById function. If they match, then we return a true, which will cause the find method to return that particular object, or else if a matching entry is not found, then we'll simply get an undefined. Let's export this function out now. Okay, so our chat page rendering mechanism is done. Now we'll go into the chatroom.ejs file, and as we did for the rooms.ejs file, we'll bring SocketIO.js client library and Babel in first. And then we'll build a script tag where we'll access the /chatter socket namespace like so. Also create 3 more variables for holding the room ID, the user's name, and his or her profile pic URL. These will be required later. And while we are at it, let's also incorporate EJS tags in the page for rendering the title of the page, which is available through the room variable like so. And let's also point the rooms button to /rooms route. Let's test the route to see if everything works as expected. I'll log in and let's create 2 chat rooms. And now if I click on any of these links, you can see the chat route load up as expected, and you can also see the topic or the name of the chat room displayed on the UI. And accessing a non-existent room correctly throws a 404.